What's up, guys? Outlaw Life installment or episode, I guess, segment number 5, which is really surprising me that it's turning out to take so many, but I guess I'm getting old and this is my entire life story. Um, about an hour and a half at a time. And so I think we had just entered into what, in a lot of ways, was the most productive period of my life in terms of insight and development and experiences of the sort of, I don't like to call it supernatural because I think that implies things that aren't real. Preternatural might be a better word, or things that are outside of the ordinary. But I also think that those things are only outside of the ordinary because we have sort of a limited perception sweep, because of our culture and our assumptions and beliefs. And the entire point of this process of what I came to call the Phoenix process is the dissolution of the mind-forged manacles of culture. So I guess I'll just kind of pick the tail up where we left off. I'll give you guys a quick little bit of background for those who might just be jumping in for the first time. I have been telling this story because I guess, in a lot of ways, it shows you what's possible in terms of escaping your upbringing, transcending your upbringing. Because I was raised in a neighborhood where there was murder and bullet holes in our window when I was a child, and drugs, and literally inbred people that were illiterate at 40 years old. And, a lot of those people, I actually found them on Facebook a few years ago, and most of them are still in that neighborhood. So it's not like I went out and became a doctor or something, definitely not that kind of transcendence, but certainly escaping that kind of like violent, ignorant, white trash environment. In fact, it didn't really influence me. Most of the damage was done at home. And so as soon as I could, I escaped home to Washington, DC. And then when I realized that environment was not healthy and that I was going down a very bad road of selling cocaine and other drugs and really getting myself involved more deeply than most people could ever imagine, I escaped to Colorado to go and get some thinking done in the mountains. And I became very, very ill. And this led to an opiate addiction, which I managed to escape and enter back into several times. I ended up in prison. And now we're approaching the last episode where we left off. I smoked DMT for the first time, and the trees' leaves turned into spinning blades, and they came right down into my face, and the trees said, if you don't stop it with the pills, you're going to be in prison in 10 days. 10 days, or in jail, excuse me. 10 days later, I was in jail. And I ended up ultimately in prison for pretty petty stuff, possession of a few pills of hydrocodone, but kind of aggravated by the fact that I kept, getting in little bits of trouble. So DWAI, which is like lesser than a DUI, but still in that neighborhood, and relatively minor assaults, and just stuff that all eventually added up to 10 months in Ordway Penitentiary. And I think we had made it to about the alien contact story. But there's something that I somehow glossed over that's pretty significant. During this period, I had a lot of experiences that really confirmed for me the existence of capacities of consciousness that are not readily acknowledged by our institutions of science and education. Telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance. All of these kind of things are fairly well documented, but they're inconsistent. And one of the main tenets of science is that things must be repeatable. And this is their main I guess, angle that they take to try to invalidate these kind of experiences and manifestations of this sort of stuff, because no one has ever been able to do it consistently. Any good magician knows that magic does not always work. In fact, in my experience, it almost seems to have its own agenda. It decides what information you're going to receive through non-ordinary channels and when that's going to happen. And that is why, there are a lot of people that apparently exhibit the capacity to do this very accurately, but then if they're taken to task, they're not always necessarily able to reproduce it. That's certainly the case with myself. And so I think we had already gotten through the meeting with Golden Light Eagle and the 1111 ruler and the bear claws falling out of the roof at the moment that I hung up the phone on my girlfriend after she was telling me that there were bears in the tree in the front yard, and all these coincidences had really started to snowball. But I think I missed a couple of really significant ones. And one of the first and most important was that I was looking for a book by Albert Pike, who was the Grand Commander of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in the United States towards the end of the Civil War. And he wrote a book called Morals and Dogma that was secret. It has a stamp. I still have it, actually. It's not right here. But I do still have it with me to this day. And so, I actually may have included this in the last stream. So if I did, forgive me, but this is where we're starting. And so I was looking for the book because I knew that Freemasonry and the mystery tradition held some part of this mystery, this puzzle that I had been piecing together since I was a child. And I was definitely correct about that. And one night I woke up having dreamed that it was on the shelf in the bookstore in Durango, Colorado, in this tiny little bookstore. And I went down there and I got the book. And I was very careful to put checks in place, to tell people what's happening so that I knew I hadn't just lost my mind. And so I told my girlfriend that we needed to go to this bookstore, and I told her what book I was going to get, and that it was in this dream, and it was right on the shelf exactly where it was in the dream. So that was my first really major indication that, I realized that you could really go out on a limb and say that that was coincidence, but I'm not really willing to accept that. That's it's so specific. I think that's just dumb. I guess it's not outside of the realm of possibility, but it's got to be astronomically low that's what happened. And so as I continued to dig, reading the first few pages of that book confirmed so much of the suspicions that I had. This 33rd degree Mason was obviously describing engineering and manipulating entire civilizations in terms of energy and geometry. And that was exactly what I was expecting. So it really encouraged me to continue to dive deeper down that particular rabbit hole. And so I decided to join the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Stellu Matutina lineage, because it's obviously very important that you find a legitimate lineage. And it's not so easy these days outside of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Just a little lesson on how this stuff works. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the OTO were formed at around the same time. And the reason that they are legitimate schools of the mysteries is that the rule is that if a 33rd degree Mason breaks off from the main body of Scottish Rite Masonry, they are able to start a new school, new lineage, a new lodge. The Scottish Rite doesn't recognize it, but it is legitimate because that's how this happens. That's where it comes from. And so on the one hand, we had the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn with McGregor Mathers and Wynne Westcott break off on the sort of right-hand path, sort of Rosicrucian influenced, more Christian-y kind of vibes. And then I can never remember, Germer Carl Germer and somebody else, also 33rd degree Masons, are almost at the exact same time broke off and started this right-hand path, left-hand path, OTO, that eventually became basically a Crowleyanity sort of sex cult. So I wasn't really interested in that. And it was a lot easier and more accessible for me to join the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And the Stella Matutina was the same lineage that Israel Reggerty had joined. And he was a secretary for Aleister Crowley for a number of years. So I knew that it was a legitimate lineage. And so I got a hold of them and managed to take initiation. I did not remain affiliated with it for more than a year, but I saw enough to know that there's something to it, mostly because of the head of the order, Robert. He would call me all different times of night, day, when I was going through this process, and he would just have some cryptic thing to say that would fit exactly. I would get stuck, puzzling some part of the mystery out, and my phone would ring, and he would say some weird cryptic thing that would be exactly the thing that would get me moving again. So, this didn't need to happen that many times before I understood, okay, these guys there's something going on here. This is not explainable in any other way. In fact, and again, I'm not sure if I told this story in the last stream or not. So I apologize if I'm retracking this stuff. Let me know in the chat if any of you guys remember this. But at one point during this process, I was driving around near Durango, Colorado, and during the height of this process, I felt extremely connected to the universe, and colors were brighter. I had a lot of telepathic experiences with Golden Light Eagle and a lot of other people, and just generally magical, extraordinary experiences. And I was driving along, and suddenly I realized that it had all stopped. And I looked at the mountain, and the mountain looked completely normal. And I pulled over, and I remembered something from a Robert Anton Wilson book called The Illuminatus Trilogy, which, by the way, is the first place that I encountered the name Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in that book, right? Remember that the name of the leader of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn at this time was a guy named Robert. So I pull my car over, and I'm looking at this mountain, and I remember this line from the book. And it's not really from the book. It's an old Zen thing, I guess. But they say, during enlightenment, or before enlightenment, mountains are mountains. During enlightenment, mountains are no longer mountains. After enlightenment, mountains are once again mountains. And then my phone rings, and I open it up, and it's Robert. And, at this point, I'm almost wondering if this guy is actually Robert Anton Wilson or something, like his ghost. It was just too weird, because what he said to me was, I said, what has happened? All of this, basically what I just described to you. And he said, you have achieved illumination. Mountains are once again mountains. And, so he said, I have an assignment for you. I said, okay, what is it? And he said, just go find a computer. How he knew I wasn't in a building with a computer, you know what I mean? He said, go find a computer. So I was driving to town, and I thought, I didn't own a computer, which is kind of incredible, but it's true. I didn't own a computer, not a laptop, not a smartphone. It's 2010, I guess. And I knew this guy, Joe, who was a bandito, which is like this cartel biker gang, basically. He wasn't with them anymore. He was old. And I went over there for various reasons. He enters this story a couple of times in incredibly weird ways too. So I remember that last time I was at Joe's place. Oh, I just said his real name. Oops. Let's call him Joe. Last time I was at Joe's place, he had gotten a new computer, and I was right down the street. So I went to Joe's house, and I go in and I said, Joe, can I use your computer? And he's like, sure, but he goes back there with me because it's in his bedroom, and he sits down, and I bring up the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's website, and it's McGregor Mathers in a robe on the screen of the computer, but Joe's eyes bug out of his head, and he's like, that's my fucking brother. What the fuck is going on right now? And I just kind of ignored him and called the secret society guy. And then it becomes super weird. He knows something really strange is going on. And I'm like, all right, what am I supposed to do here? Do you want me to do I need to fill out a form? Because I had just taken initiation. Do I need to pay dues or something? What is this? And he says, no. This isn't about money. What's going on right now? And I was like, what? And he's like, what's going on right now? And I look over at Joe, and his eyes are like welling up with tears, and he's like, what the fuck is this? Like, he's just muttering, losing his mind. I almost got killed over this, I found out later, because he was Catholic, and he's like, this dude is possessed by demons right now. Like, he was going to blow my head off. His son told me later that he was seriously considering blowing my head off at that moment. And so we go out into the living room, because I understood all of a sudden. I was like, all right. And I hung up. And I said, Joe, can we just go sit in the living room and smoke a bowl and talk a little bit? And he's like, sure. Probably more because he just wanted to know what was happening more than he actually wanted to sit down and talk to me. So I sit on the floor in front of him, and he's sitting in this recliner by this lamp. And he's like, eyes wide and, obviously uncomfortable. And I took a big hit of the weed, but I knew that I didn't want to get really stoned. And everything, I closed my eyes and everything turned deep purple. And I knew that was significant. And it would turn out I would confirm that later. And remember that I'm not a person that necessarily believes in channeling. Although something along those lines happened twice during this period that were really convincing. And once we get through this story, I'll tell you the other one, because I'm sure I didn't tell it in the last stream. I started asking him questions, and it wasn't like those TV psychics where there's 30 people in the room and they're like, I'm getting a T, Thomas, like a really common name. These are Mexicans, and they all have Mexican names. And, I wasn't that well versed in the culture. I mean, I have some idea of what Latin names are, but they were weird, things you wouldn't expect. And I was like, who is this? And he's like, that's the bitch that got my brother killed. And I'm like, and what about this and name? And he's like, that's their dog. So I did not grope. I did not try to think of stuff and stutter and none of that shit. And by the way, we still don't have to invoke woo to explain this, because if it's true that you can establish a feedback loop with another person, all of this information was in his head. So it's not necessarily to believe that I was channeling the dead here. It's 100% possible that I was just pulling it all out of Joe's memory. And that's what I tend to lean towards to explain this kind of stuff. Although when this happened with my mom a couple days later, she was 1,500 miles away, which is a little bit more difficult to invoke this feedback loop. And so I set about trying to convince him that he had to forgive the guy that killed his brother, because I realized this anger and this hatred is why he's on OxyContin. This is why he's angry all the time. This is eating him alive. And he's actually a good guy. He's probably killed a few dozen people in his lifetime, probably tortured some of those. You know what I mean? Cartel biker. I mean, but at this point in his life, he's past that, and he's a decent guy, and he's being tortured by this murder of his brother. So eventually, because the guy that had killed his brother was already dead. So he had no way of getting vengeance. And he's just like going mad because there's nothing he can do. There's no one to shoot, there's no one to torture. The guy's already gone. And so we go through this big, long process of reasoning and a couple times he's getting really mad at me. Like, how is this any of your business, white man? Like, what is this, And eventually he kind of agrees that he has to forgive this guy. And the moment he says that, this thing comes out from under the lampshade. And it kind of looked like one of those mosquito hawks, only it was the size of like a bonsai tree or something. We were in Colorado, It made no sense. I'm not saying it was the spirit of his brother or something, but that's kind of what I thought at the time. And I saw Joe see it, and I saw his eyes like bug out of his head. And he went to kill it. He pulled his hand back because it was insane. Like, this thing made no sense. It couldn't be real, and yet it was there, and Joe saw it, And he went to kill it, and I was like, Joe, no! And it flew out the window, and it was gone. And I swear to this day, I have trouble saying something like this even. But I have a hard time believing that there wasn't some connection between that weird-ass thing that came out of the lampshade and what had happened with him releasing this stuff with his brother. I'm not saying it wasn't just a giant insect that was extremely rare or something, but I have no answers as to like what in the hell that could have been exactly. So I go home and you guys, a lot of this stuff, I am trying to write a book. A lot of it is there's too many threads that intersect. I don't even know how to organize it, honestly, to make it coherent for someone else to understand. I think I'm going to have a lot more luck writing that down. So we're only going through the like major highlights here. I think the next day I ran into a kid on the street that we went through like a 2-day process of just incredibly weird interactions that probably would suit a book better. But I'll tell you about this conversation that I had with my mom right around this time. That was insane. So I was 11 years old when my mom told me that my father wasn't actually my father. Remember how I told you guys I grew up white trash and Jerry Springer all the way? Like, seriously. I actually called when I was like 10 or 11 years old. I called all of those shows because I was like, man, I got a story for you guys. Shit. And they actually called back and my mom picked up the phone and she was furious, man. She's like, really? You tried to get us on Jerry Springer? I was thinking, look at yourself, woman. Like, are you really surprised? Like, why do you think you're so mad right now? But anyways, so, they're like, this isn't really your dad. Confusingly, they're both named Jeff for some reason. I guess she had a thing for guys named Jeff. And she was dating my biological father and had been for like 3 or 4 months. So he was already there. And she's like, this current boyfriend of mine is actually your biological dad. So my actual name is 4 names long. I guess I'm already pretty thoroughly doxed on this channel, so there's no point in not telling you that it's Harley James Michael Donnelly. 2 biblical names in the middle, and the tetragrammaton is 4 letters long. It did not escape my notice. So the reason for that is that my mom had a boyfriend when she... No. It wasn't she said it wasn't a boy. I don't know what to think. It sounds like it was like her twin flame or some kind of like soulmate sort of scenario, like deep, deep friendship. I don't really know if it was romantic or not, but it was like the most important person to her in her world. And his name was Michael James. So when I was born at the hospital, my dad, who wasn't my biological father, was there. Who would become my little brother's father, I guess. The guy who kind of raised me until I was like 9 or something, and then he got arrested or thrown out or something. And anyways, so they start arguing about, because he's like, you are not naming him after your dead boyfriend. So So they're arguing, and my mom says that the doctor just wrote all four names that he was hearing down. And that's how I ended up with four names. It's not because I'm Catholic and it wasn't deliberate, but they were like, my mom was saying, no, I want to name him after James Michael, but we can change the order to Michael James at least. And then my dad's like, no, we're going to name him Harley. And the doctor's like, fuck both of you guys, Harley James Michael Donnelly. And so my mom had told me that he died in a motorcycle accident, which is a lie, I think, that was inspired by my first name. She just needed something to tell me because I asked her, why do I have four names? And she said, well, I had this friend and he died in a car accident and motorcycle accident. And, he was a really good friend of mine, so I named him after you. And I was a little kid, so I said, okay. But then one day after this incident with Joe, where I had apparently channeled the names of the people involved in his brother's homicide, I was sitting out in the backyard of our house in Colorado, and this voice that had kind of guided me through all of these processes is still occasionally with me today, although I honestly feel like it's kind of frustrated that I have fought and failed it so many times, just refusing to go along with it, It was like, call your mom and ask her about James. I was like, what? And it said, ask her what Steve Miller had to do with it. And I was like, what? Steve Miller, the rock star? And it was like, no, but just call her and ask her this. So I was like, all right. So I pulled my phone out, called my mom up, and I said, tell me about James Michael. And she said, why? What? And that voice said, ask her how he really died. And I said, how did he really die? It wasn't a motorcycle accident, was it? And she's quiet. And she's like, no. I was like, uh-huh. So what really happened? He went out to a golf course and huffed himself to death while drunk. And he died from aerosol huffing or whatever. But it was suicide, basically. She ended up killing herself as well. So, the whole soulmate thing, they ended up dying the same, not exactly the same way, but both from suicide. And, I'm not supposed to say that because of the algorithm, huh? Damn it. I'm supposed to say unalived, aren't I? I'm such a terrible YouTuber. No wonder my views are so low. Share my videos, hit the like button. By the way, we just found out that we are moving unexpectedly about 2,000 miles or kilometers from here. So I'm going to be streaming a lot over the next couple of days until we leave because I won't be able to do anything during the 4 to 7 days that we're on a boat. So don't miss Saturday. I'll be here all day. And I'm going to do a music stream after this stream. So if you're interested in that, come hang out with me. Bring your electronic, your tips, your Bitcoins and whatnot. So anyways, that was a bad place to to break that story up, wasn't it? So I said, okay, why? Why did he kill himself? He caught his girlfriend cheating on him. So I guess it wasn't my mom's boyfriend. It really was just her best friend, I guess. And I said, with Steve Miller? Stone quiet. Yes. How do you know that? And I'm just silent. And she's like, you're scaring me, Harley. You're like some TV psychic right now or something. I'm like, this ain't television. That really just happened. And, I had been kind of trying to tell her, like, something's going on, Mom. And it's not, like, I haven't lost my mind and I'm not on drugs. I wasn't. I had stopped taking pills and I wasn't even really taking psychedelics. I had a few DMT experiences around this time, but it was not, nothing over the top. And so she hung up and didn't speak to me again for like 2 weeks because that was just so incredibly weird. And so, like I said, I do want to write a book about all this. I don't want to ruin it for you guys, so I'm not going to go through this day by day, although I will tell you this. Every fucking hour of every day was like this for at least a year. And it did eventually simmer down. It's not like it's ever stopped, thank God, because I think I would get really bored or depressed or something if the magic just vanished or whatever. I've been terrified that would happen on numerous occasions. And it never does, thankfully. Sometimes it waxes and wanes, it ebbs and flows, just in the same way that Terence McKenna described novelty, ebbing and flowing. But all right, so let's get back to James and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, because this is where things start to get like next level crazy. So for those of you who might not have heard all of this yet, I'll give a quick overview of we had a bunch of synchronicities that occurred that were left, physical evidence. So they were undeniable. And then we went and met with Golden Light Eagle, whose daughter actually just reached out to me the other day, which was pretty crazy. I didn't know that Golden Light Eagle had passed away in 2016 until the other day or a few months ago or something. And so I was sad to hear that. And I made a video, a kind of tribute to him. And I guess his daughter saw it and reached out to me. So that was cool. Standing Elk is her name. And anyway, so we had that experience. And then there was some sort of strange UFO sort of phenomena that I experienced, although can't really be sure what it was exactly. But, several times in my life, I've seen these little silver teardrop shaped vessels. And Golden Light Eagle's primary message was that some of us were telepathically connected to the star tribes, and, totally a bit much for me to accept. But by the time it was all done, I wasn't so sure I could dismiss it anymore. And then on the way home from the star gathering, I had that experience where I was sitting by the river, and I was just like thinking, I'm not playing along with this anymore. Whatever this is, I just don't want to do it anymore. I'm done. And this voice in my head said, all of the things that you have seen and experienced, and you still don't believe this. And I was like, no, I'm not just going to go insane and agree to like whatever this is, that it's real. And it said, stand up and turn around. So I stood up and turned around, knowing full well what I was going to see. And there's this little teardrop silver vessel above the mesa. My girlfriend was there, and I didn't want to put the idea in her head, so I didn't say anything. And she goes, do you see that? And the second she acknowledged it, it zipped off and it was gone. And so that's just one example, just in case some of you guys weren't here for the last part. You can go back and watch that if you like. But, there were lots more little occasions like that. So one night I'm driving home, and I still had a flip phone, 2010, right? I was behind the times. And I even remember the song that we were listening to, or at least the band. It was Black Sabbath. And I was thinking Ozzy had never sounded so powerful and evil before. And I was absolutely loving this song. Like it was the first time I'd ever heard it, even though it was one of those Sabbath songs that the classic rock stations just played into the ground. And the phone rang. So I had it mounted, in the car, and I just flipped it open, and I was like, hello? And he's like, it's Robert, from the leader, the head of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And my girlfriend's in the passenger seat, so she hears this. And he says, contact is imminent. And I was already well aware of that. Actually, I didn't tell you guys about the millionaire whose house I was at the day before that had the 3 scoops taken out of his ankle. Did I? No, let's back up for a second and talk. This was the day before this. I'd just been through all these experiences, and I'm at this guy's house, and his dad was heavily into the cult, and he had all these amps that he built, right? And I was like, how did you build all these? How did you learn to do this? Did you just read books or something? And he said, no, I'm too dyslexic. I can't even read. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I was abducted when I was 9. I was like, what? What do you mean you were abducted? And he pulled his pant leg up, and he had, in the shape of the Pythagorean tetractys, 3 perfectly half spheres scooped out of his ankle, and they were exactly in an equilateral triangle, just like I think it's called a tetractys that you see whenever Masons write important initials, they put that there. It was exactly like that, and it was like perfect little surgical scoops, 3 of them, perfect equilateral triangle in his ankle. And he said that he downloaded while he was on their ship how the ship worked, and that since then he could build anything. And it was true. He had all this crazy shit all in his garage, electronic stuff that he had built. And then he starts explaining how the UFOs work. And he's like, so there are these magnets in them, and they swivel them around. But he was going into like as if I was reading the blueprints or schematics for the engine. It wasn't just like, yeah, there are magnets. It was insane. And this dude has never read a book, according to him. There were definitely no books in the house. So that happened the day before this next incident. And so I'm driving home, and Robert says contact is imminent. And I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised. And we get home, park the car, go in the house, and there's like a glass. I may have gotten this far in the last episode. Again, if I did, I'm sorry. I definitely want to end with this, though, because I didn't want to start this with it. So I go in the house. It's a glass adobe house, like big glass adobe house in this beautiful valley in Colorado. And it had, heated floors, really nice place. And I close the door, and I see the translucent outline of some little 4-foot tall thing zip by. And I thought the same thing I always thought when stuff like that happened and there was someone around, don't say shit. And then I looked at my girlfriend, and she goes, did you see that? And that's the second time, right? This is the same girl that saw the little teardrop thing. And I was like, don't say anything. It was exactly the same scenario. And so we go back into the bedroom, and I am at this point exhausted. I'm not trying to play along anymore. I'm over it. I really didn't, it's like, in a way, all these experiences were what I would always hoping would happen to me. But it actually got to be too much even for me, where I was like, I just want to this can just stop now, and that would be good. But the house sort of filled with this crackling, ultraviolet electrical sort of energy, like a film of it, very similar to what you see if you take mushrooms or something, only it was blue and it made a noise. And my dog was sitting on the bed, and he was a pit bull, and he never did this before or after, but he suddenly just fell over snoring. And if you've ever seen somebody punched, I saw a squirrel do this when somebody shot it in the forehead with a BB gun on YouTube earlier today. Apparently even squirrels do it. But when you get knocked out, there's a tendency to just go with your eyes rolled up in your head. And the dog did that. And I realized they just turned the fucking dog off. Like he had a switch and they just turned him off. And my girlfriend goes, I want to go out there and see them. And I hear footsteps, but 100 miles an hour or something, like. And I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to bed. Fuck this. And I pulled the blankets up over my head. Didn't even ask her the next day. Did you go out there? Didn't even ask. Didn't care. Didn't want to know. But it didn't stop there. I woke up the next morning, and there's this music coming from my pot garden. There was like a sliding glass door. And it was open, and there's a pot garden out there, and there's like this. It was sort of almost like bubbling up, like bloop, 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 bloop. But it sounded like if a gateway to another dimension. Like there is no DJ on earth that has a sound like this to this day. Like whatever it was so far beyond our ability to reproduce. I mean, there's no words. Like I could see also the geometric structure of it somehow. And I was still so pissed off that I was being harassed by the universe constantly with all this insane weirdness that I refused to go out there. until it stopped. So I go out to the kitchen, and Book 4 by Aleister Crowley was sitting on the countertop. So I opened it up, and it says, "The master awakes in a heavily scented garden with otherworldly music playing. And he has imagined himself attaining all these levels, or reaching all these levels of attainment, when the entire time it has just been the demon Crowley whispering in his ear." And, you know, the fact that I had just woken up hearing this weird music coming from a pot garden, and it says, "The master awakes with this music in the heavily scented garden." I mean, you guys, at that moment, I was not really sure anymore. Is this really ETs? Or is this all some kind of weird, demonic, interdimensional trick? Or, you know, what the fuck is actually happening here? And there was a bunch of indications of that, actually. And I, you know, for the record, I still to this day do not really believe in that sort of thing. But I don't know if it was the next night or somewhere right around that time. We had these wire lights in the kitchen. So they're like wires with little UFO-shaped lights all along them. And one night I went out there, and there was no trash built up in the house. There was nothing, like, no reason for this. And there was like 10,000 flies all over those wires. And I knew what that was supposed to mean. And I knew that I had been potentially opening up that kind of energy. If certain people were correct about these things. And I still don't think they are, honestly. But then again, some of this stuff's kind of hard to write off. That when my girlfriend saw that, actually, I called her out, and she came out, she saw the flies, she knew what it meant. And she had this Michael, Archangel Michael, who was supposed to keep Satan out of the garden, right? So she lights the candle, and we go outside for like 30 minutes. We come back in, it's completely burned away. It was like, 3 inches thick and like a foot tall, and she lights this thing, and it's like just gone. So stuff like that was happening that made me wonder, what is it that we're actually dealing with here? Yeah. So that's going to wrap up this, I don't know what to call this stream, I guess. We'll just call it episode. I don't know. Because I'm going to jump on and play music. We've been getting really uneven attendance for those. I don't really know what to make of it. And then also, you guys are watching the wrong ones. I noticed the other day that I posted one where I forgot, like I would stop playing and have to remember the pitch and then start again, and it was all just a mess. It got like 4 times as many views as all the ones where I was killing it the entire time. So I don't know how that's happening. Maybe people are more interested in laughing at you when you're fucking up than they are in actually like watching you slay. I don't know what to make of that, but I hope this wasn't a repeat of last time. I did skim over it and try to figure out what I had already talked about and what I hadn't. Hopefully I'll have time to pre-record the next couple of installments of this and post them that way. Edit it a little bit too, so they will be a little bit more flowy, coherent, I guess. And because I'm going to be on a boat for 4 to 7 days, how it can, anywhere between 4 and 7 days somehow. I might actually have internet out there. If so, I'll see you then. But otherwise, we have tomorrow night, and then Saturday, I'm going to be here all day trying to raise funds for this unexpected adventure. And basically, I'll tell you guys, what, it's just our dog, I guess. I don't know. But Yeah, just suddenly we were informed that we needed to keep our dog tied up and outside. So we don't do that. And we were planning to go to Cusco anyways eventually. I was hoping to have an event here in order to make it a little bit easier for us. And because it's a great place to bring people, subscribers to. But I'm not, that's not how we treat animals. So, we're out of here. And there's nowhere else to rent. And Quito's also, another thing is we came here partly because we were trying to get our expenses down. Ecuador is kind of expensive as far as South America goes. And Iquitos is more expensive. It's crazy expensive. It's like people don't want to accept that tourism is down, that the ayahuasca industry is cooling off because people have experienced it by now, a lot of them, you know, and it's cooling off. And I think people are in denial that that's happening. So they're kind of still expecting these crazy prices for rent here. And just kind of irritated. I think they're irritated a little bit that we were renting. Our agreement was that we would rent the entire place if we had an event, but between events we're only renting one room, but the whole place is empty. So from their point of view, we're renting it for the price of a room instead of the entire building, which we just don't need. It's not our fault that there aren't other tourists, you know, or people or whatever, right? So anyways, that's the drama, I think. And the dog, she's never, you know, bitten anyone, or she is scary looking though. She's pretty big. Pretty thick girl. So anyways, you guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Hop on over the music stream if you'd like. Join my Patreon if you are a rock star and you would like to be in the inner circle of the Illuminati. We spend a lot of time studying Masonic degrees in there and going through occult fundamentals from ranking officers in the OTO and all sorts of, and also shamanic techniques and traditions and all sorts of stuff over the course of 4 years. There's 4 years worth of content that you open up. And also you can join my Discord. A lot of people are telling me that you don't get notifications for my content. Some of you do, some of you don't. That's the way these shadow bans work, I think. They don't completely cancel you. They just kind of like let you trickle out into the world instead of the normal getting pushed by the algorithm with the normal rules. So if you actually want to get notified and make sure of it, you join my Discord. The link is in the description. And then you'll actually get notified if you turn your Discord notifications on. So anyways, thank you guys all so much again, and I'll see you in a little bit.